Everyone's really mad at Edward Snowden again. The GOP releases its midterm agenda, and Kyrsten Sinema is even more iconic than we already thought. Let's jump into it. Hey guys, if you're new here, I'm Brad Polumbo. This is the BASEDPolitics podcast, and today with me is Jack Hunter, our regular guest co-host, because Hannah Cox is out and actually in Paris right now. So I don't know, are you feeling a little jealous of Hannah at the moment, Jack?
Absolutely. I wish I was gallivanting around in Paris. So she's having a great time and deserves a break.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not jealous of her. I hope she's having a blast, but sounds like a nightmare. All the long travel, the rude people who hate America.
Well, you're just you're such a homebody, Brad. She's out and about. And
I am a homebody, and also if I'm gonna travel, I want like sunny tropical beach resorts, not over like just European. I've had some European experiences are great. I loved Greece. But like Paris, like everyone hates you. They give you dirty looks. They're all incredible. The culture there is incredibly lazy. Things are always closed. Service is abysmal. Yeah, I'm just not a fan. And then the delicacies are like snails and frogs' legs.
I guess when you put it that way.
I think I'm all right. So, Jack, what's new with you since we last had you on the podcast? Have you been to any fine cultural events?
Oh, yes, I have, which means a few wrestling events. I saw the thrash metal band Dirty Rotten Imbeciles, DRI, last weekend for viewers old enough to know who the hell that is. But yeah, I've been staying busy back and forth between Charleston, South Carolina, and D.C., and right now I'm in D.C., more specifically Old Town Alexandria, Virginia.
I miss Old Town. I really do. For folks that don't know, I used to live there. It is just a wonderful little, not quite a suburb. It's its own little city in its own right, outside of D.C. a bit. That's where I lived for my last year in D.C., and Jack knows that. We would get together pretty regularly, but it's just so much better than the actual city. I don't miss D.C. itself at all, but I do miss Old Town a little bit.
Yeah, I've been here a decade. I've lived in 4 different places, including in the district, and Old Town's the best place you could live in this vicinity.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agree. I do miss going to DC United, the soccer team in DC. There's no MLS team, no Major League Soccer team here in my part of Michigan. So the closest we have is in Chicago, which is pretty far away.
Yeah, that would be a trek. And yeah, your soccer-loving self, you're not going to do as well in Michigan as you did in DC, for sure.
No. And, of course, there's weirdly a huge break in professional soccer right now for an international break, so there just hasn't been any games on in forever. So I'm waiting for that to end this weekend. They're back at it. But in the meantime, Jack, everybody is really mad at Edward Snowden, a former NSA contractor turned whistleblower. Let me just read you a tweet to set the tone for this segment, right? This guy, Dave Troy, says, "It's time for us to come to grips with the fact that the Snowden, Greenwald, and Assange operations were all part of a years-long Russia-supported effort to upend the West." So, Snowden's trending again. And the news here is because he just received Russian citizenship, which we'll break down in just a moment. But Jack, how about you followed this for years? Just give us like the 60-second overview. Who is Snowden? Why is he famous? What did he do?
60 seconds will be a feat, but here I go. So Edward Snowden was an NSA contractor. He worked for the U.S. federal government, the National Security Agency. And he noticed that we were using mass surveillance against Americans in ways that were clearly unconstitutional for somebody who knows very little about the Constitution. I'm not talking about Snowden. I'm just talking about a layman's understanding. And he saw James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, testify before Congress and tell Ron Wyden, a Democratic U.S. Senator, when Wyden asked, "Do you mass surveil Americans, spy on everybody?" And James Clapper said, "No, we don't," basically, which is perjury, and he was accused of perjury later. Well, that inspired Snowden to tell everybody in 2013 via using information that he leaked, and he gave to Glenn Greenwald, a reporter with The Guardian in the UK at the time, "Hey, this is what your government's doing to you. This is illegal. It's unconstitutional. It should be disturbing." Everybody heard about it. Obama administration at first like, "No, we're not doing that." Then 2 days later, like, "Well, yeah, we are kind of doing that. This is what it looks like. It's not as bad as he says." And just trying to back out of it. But bottom line, end of my rant, Edward Snowden is a whistleblower hero. Daniel Ellsberg, who did the Pentagon Papers that showed us what the Vietnam War was really about, called him a hero, said he's the new version of me, basically. Let us all know that our government is spying on us en masse all the time in ways that are completely illegal, as ruled by a federal court not too long ago.
Yeah, you just made that point, but actually he's been vindicated because the big program he exposed was ruled unconstitutional by federal courts a few years ago. But so the news update that has him trending again is that he has received Russian citizenship. Let me read here a little bit from the New York Times. President Vladimir Putin on Monday granted Russian citizenship to Edward J. Snowden, the former U.S. intelligence contractor who became one of the world's most high-profile fugitives after he disclosed mass surveillance techniques to news organizations. Mr. Snowden said in 2020 that he was applying for Russian citizenship, describing the decision as a practical measure to give his family greater freedom crossing borders. His request was granted by Mr. Putin in a decree dated Monday and published by the Kremlin. He was among dozens of foreigners granted citizenship in this decree. So a lot of people are having a negative kind of knee-jerk reaction to this, to him becoming a Russian citizen. For a few reasons, one of which is that the attack line against him has always been that he's a traitor, that he sold out the U.S., and that he endangered us and gave our enemies our information. And so at first glance, a lot of people think that this plays into that, but I actually think it's a lot more complicated than that. Because it's one thing I learned reading up on this story was that it's not like Snowden chose to be in Russia. Take a listen to this clip of Glenn Greenwald where he explains how Snowden was essentially trapped in Russia by the Biden administration.
You know, Snowden's in Russia. You know why he's in Russia? Because the U.S. government forced him to be there by invalidating his passport when he tried to leave and by Joe Biden bullying every other country that he applied for asylum with. They trapped him in Russia. He never chose to be there. He was planning on transiting through. And then they used the fact that he's in Russia to say, oh, look, he's a traitor. Otherwise, why would he be in Russia?
So, Jack, it's not as if he just chose, I really would like to hang out in Moscow.
No, it was a last resort. Look, he tried to go to a number of different places, and the Obama administration, with Joe Biden doing a lot of the muscle work, denied him access for asylum. Ecuador, I think, was the last stop before Russia was the last resort. He didn't want to be there. For years, he has said he has expressed that he wants to come home to the United States. He has now 2 sons and a wife that has joined him there. He's applied for dual citizenship in Russia and the United States because he wants a normal life and stability and has kids and a family. None of this was his choosing. His choice was to be a hero and let us know what our government was doing to us when nobody else was going to do it. The routes that the establishment, the government, Hillary Clinton, the Obama administration suggested he take was that he'd come home and he'd tell the authorities about these worries about mass surveillance, and he would have proper whistleblower protections. You know what that would mean? He'd be in a dark room, you would have never known his name, and you would have never known any of his revelations. How do we know this? Because other whistleblowers, a man by the name of Thomas Drake, who also had similar complaints about the NSA and mass surveillance, did the same thing. Do you know who that is? No, you don't, because they kind of squashed it and threatened the hell out of him. So that's what happens. Daniel Ellsberg, who I mentioned earlier, and for people who don't know, during the Vietnam era, he got a hold of the Pentagon Papers from the Pentagon that kind of gave a real picture of what was going on with the Vietnam War that the public wasn't aware of. It was a big part of public opinion turning against the war. Today, he's considered a hero. He's critically acclaimed, talking about Daniel Ellsberg. And he said at the time Snowden made his revelations, he did this in the right way. If he had come to the United States and did what the Obama administration and the federal government suggested he do publicly, you would, what I just said, you would have never heard of him. He could have been tortured for all we know. But he did exactly what he needed to do. He's a hero. He deserves not only to live in Russia in peace, better yet, the United States, but our government won't do that because they have, egg on their face. They have to admit they were wrong. But he deserves to do that. He deserves statues in this country honoring his sacrifice far more than the persecution that the U.S. federal government continues to put on him.
Yeah, and if he did come back, he would be facing that same persecution. Take a listen to this clip of how the Biden State Department reacted to the news of his citizenship.
Our position has not changed. Mr. Snowden should return to the United States, where he should face justice, as any other American citizen would. Perhaps the only thing that has changed is that as a result of his Russian citizenship, apparently now he may well be conscripted to fight in Russia's war in Ukraine.
First of all, this crap about him being conscripted to go fight Ukraine or whatever is something that his enemies that has nothing to do with any of this. This has to do about stability for his family in a situation that he did not choose. The Obama administration, the Biden administration, get my decades crisscrossed, the Biden administration and that spokesman saying he needs to come back and face justice. Who in the NSA is facing justice for spying on me and you, Brad, and anybody watching this or listening to this, and anybody else in the continental United States? Not a damn person. These people are ridiculous. I'm sorry, I get very heated about this because the political establishment, and especially in the Trump era, post-Trump era, so many people on the Democratic side associate Putin with bad, and they're right. He's a terrible person. But then they link that to Trump, and now they link it to Snowden, who in the Bush era they would have cheered for unveiling, this anti-civil liberties policy that our government has. They buy into this. They think, oh, Snowden is a Kremlin agent and all this crap, and it's completely ridiculous. And the traditional progressive perspective, Edward Snowden is a hero. And the pro-civil libertarian / regular libertarian perspective, Edward Snowden is a hero. And the establishment and neoconservative view of what's right and what's wrong, Edward Snowden is a villain. And that's what's so topsy-turvy about our political landscape right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because the classical journalist perspective, you mentioned the Pentagon Papers, but even I saw the Knight Foundation and some other, classic journalistic organizations, they might have different things about Edward Snowden they don't like. I mean, he's done a fair amount of commentary in recent years that's political, right, and has pissed some people off, but whatever. They say what he actually did, publishing documents like this, is something that has to be protected if you care about the First Amendment and the free press. And he would be facing decades behind bars, right? He would be facing, if he did come home and face justice, he would be facing more time in jail than your typical rapist, really. I mean, it's nuts to me that anyone could say that with a straight face. And his lawyers already pointed out he's not going to be conscripted. He wouldn't qualify for that. That's right. a silly gotcha that's kind of irrelevant. The real reason he wants the citizenship is because he has a son who was born in Russia, is a Russian citizen, and he wants to make sure that their family is intact and they aren't separated from each other. I mean, the whole thing, I just don't get it. I don't get why they're holding this against him unless it's just they blindly hate him and this is the latest thing they can glom onto.
Well, I totally get it. They believe that they should be able to do whatever they want, Constitution be damned, and how dare he shine a light on it. We're laughing, but that is exactly what it is, and it's not new. It's pre-Snowden. That's how they treat people who shine a light on what the government is actually doing that may be illegal. And let me add to that, and Greenwald makes this point a lot, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist whose work was based on the Edward Snowden revelations. In journalism, and you know this, Brad, Hannah would know this if she's sitting here, so much of reporting is people telling newspapers, sometimes anonymously, or, I'd say newspapers, it's dated, but, I'm saying news outlets, but people telling, whether they're in government or institutions, but sometimes anonymously, sometimes they use their name, depending on how much they want to risk, information that the general public's not supposed to know. That's called reporting. It's protected by the First Amendment. We're talking about Julian Assange, talking about Greenwald. Those are maybe different versions of it, but just basic reporting every day is somebody saying something that the general public's not supposed to know, and that is the traditional purpose of the press, to challenge the authority.
And I just have to say, Jack, there were so many people during the Trump years who leaked anonymously things, confidential things, anonymous sources leaked to the New York Times, to the CNN, to the Washington Post. Not all of it might have been as sensitive as what Snowden was handling, but there's illegal leaking that's technically in violation of the law. Happens all the time, and it is very, very rarely, only selectively punished. And during the Trump era, it was heralded by the media. They were like, and to be clear, I don't think those people, maybe some rare exceptions, but generally I don't believe in consequences for leaking, especially not legal consequences. Maybe you get fired from your job if you're the Supreme Court clerk who leaked the opinion, but I don't certainly think you should be locked up. And so there's a clear double standard here. The entire thing has been corrupted by tribalism and partisanship, and it's just a shame because there's a family here caught up in the crosshairs. I do feel bad for him, but I don't feel that bad for him because he did know what he was doing. I feel especially my heart goes out to his wife and his young children who their lives have been permanently altered by this. And they've never done anything. I don't think he's really done anything wrong, but they've definitely never done anything wrong. So the whole thing, he should be allowed to come home. The Russian citizenship thing, I don't get why it's such a big deal.
He has to do it for his family and stability. He has no choice. And people who don't understand that, the people I get angriest at are, when this first happened, we're still kind of close to the Bush era, close enough even though Obama was president. You had a lot of hawkish Republicans saying, basically, hang this guy, execute this guy. We trust the government. We love the NSA. And now, post-Trump, with so many Democrats having these thoughts about Putin and, of course, with Ukraine and all that now, they think that Snowden is somehow in cahoots with Putin. And they're all crazy. All these people are damn crazy. Like, this guy did us a service. We would not know right now about the mass surveillance programs that we've known about for about a decade if not for what he did. And that's the bottom line. He did the right thing, and he's a hero. He deserves statues, not persecution.
All right. On that note, let's shift gears and take a look at a big domestic story. Republicans in Congress, led by Kevin McCarthy, who is the minority leader, former Speaker of the House, they have just unveiled what they're calling the Commitment to America. It is a big platform that they say they're going to run for. This is what Republicans stand for in the 2022 midterms coming up in November. So we're going to break it down item by item and take a look at this to see if this agenda is based or cringe. First up, Jack, let's just take a listen to Kevin McCarthy's kind of announcement video that he did to roll this out.
When you and your family go shopping, you probably ask yourself, can we afford this? Now more than ever, Americans are struggling just to get by, wondering if they could even make it. You know what's even worse? The country's struggle goes beyond just the grocery store. Violent crime is at record highs in our streets and neighborhoods. The border has become a national security crisis, with fentanyl killing our fellow citizens. Soaring inflation has shrunk paychecks and sent us into a recession. And our kids have fallen further behind thanks to school closures and lockdowns. The White House and the Democrat majority in Congress control Washington. They're in charge. This is their record. And yet, they want you to give them 2 more years of power. But Republicans have a plan for a new direction, one that'll get our country back on track. It's called the Commitment to America, a plan for an economy that's strong, where you can feed your family and fill up your tank, a nation that's safe, where communities are protected by the police and criminals are prosecuted, a future that's built on freedom, where your children come first and are taught to dream big, and a government that's accountable, where politicians don't get special treatment. We simply cannot afford 2 more years of business as usual in Washington. We need common sense change now. If you agree, join us and tens of millions more across this great country. Because people like you, who work hard, play by the rules, deserve better.
Jack, do you believe we need common sense change? I kid, but the biggest criticism levied against this is just that it's pretty rife with platitudes and very light on specifics or tangibles. And just from that opening advert, I can see why people are making that criticism.
Well, yeah, I mean, do we need common sense change? Well, I think in any era in the history of humankind, I guess we do. What the hell does that mean is the question. And it leads to what you just said. Are these just platitudes? And what is he really saying there? So look, in the overall strategy, I guess, that the Republican Party is trying to do, whereas the Biden administration and Democrats are trying to make it about MAGA fascists taking over whatever, right? Like, they're focusing on that. They're focusing on Trump still. They don't want to focus on the Democrats' own record and Biden with rising inflation. McCarthy says, we're going to help the cost of living. Obviously, the defund the police effort by the Democrats was a massive failure. It's not seen well. It's not taken well by the general public. So they want to focus on that with the crime thing. But it's mostly about the defund of the police and how unpopular that was. They're not wrong to put the spotlight on the Biden administration, Kevin McCarthy, whatever they're trying to do with this. But it is vague. They're not really saying specifically what they want to do. Look, I am old enough to remember in '94 the contract with America with Newt Gingrich. I was a teenager at the time. And the promises they made, it was the first time Republicans. Yes, I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm 97 years old, so different place, different time. But those platitudes were just as vague. I mean, maybe a little more specific, but not by much. Newt Gingrich was a rock star there for a second, went on Rush Limbaugh's program when he didn't have guests, and it was a big deal, and they reneged on basically everything they said pretty soon. But Republicans did win the House for the first time in decades at the time. So in the situation, the political environment we're in now, I don't think this is the worst messaging, but any critic who says, well, what in the hell does all this mean?
Yeah, I mean, but that's all political adverts, right? So we pulled out the actual specifics from the document they released, and we're going to run through those. First up, they emphasize the economy. Number one thing, fight inflation and lower the cost of living. It says curb wasteful government spending that is raising the price of groceries, gas, cars, housing, and growing our national debt. Increase take-home pay, create good-paying jobs, and bring stability to the economy through pro-growth tax and deregulatory policies. I think, firstly, focusing on inflation as a top priority is absolutely the right call. It's the number one thing for voters right now. And then I think everything they're saying here is based. It's great. I guess my only kind of eyebrow raise is, all right, but y'all did do a good bit of spending when Trump was in office, and then especially early COVID. And then the pro-growth tax and deregulatory policies, Republicans do kind of believe in that, but they make a lot of exceptions, right? Some of them are pushing big antitrust regulations, big tech regulations. So I like everything that's stated there. I raise an eyebrow at their full commitment to it and some of their past track record on it.
Well, I would raise an eyebrow to any era at either party who act like they're actually sticking to conservative or progressive or whatever we're looking at principles. I mean, it's all situational, right? It's always been that way. You have a few. You have, a Ron Paul, a Rand Paul, a Thomas Massey, a Justin Amash when he was still there that you could count on. But for the most part, most Republicans or Democrats, whichever way the wind is blowing, that's how it is. So they want to reduce inflation. I agree with that. A big part of why we have inflation is we've spent a gazillion dollars in the last 5 to 6 years, especially during the COVID era. And guess who was a big part of that? As you pointed out, Brad, Republicans. And they offer certain regulations and other things. How do you lower inflation? Well, you can't unspend all that money, and that's a major factor. Is Ron Paul going to come in and end the Federal Reserve? That might help, but I don't think they're going to do that. So how do they do that? And they're right to say they want to do that. They're right to target that as the main worry and priority that most voters will have more than anything else.
I think all they can do is stop making it worse, right? Like Biden, if you'd let him, would do more spending.
Yes, he's doing it right now with Ukraine. How many spending packages have we sent over there so
I just
far?
saw something today about billions more for that, actually. Number 2 on this list, we've got make American energy independent and reduce gas prices. Maximize production of reliable, cleaner, American-made energy and cut the permitting process time in half to reduce reliance on foreign countries, prevent rolling blackouts, and lower the cost of gas and utilities. I mean, this is all good stuff. I do agree that the Biden administration has had a lot of anti-energy policies, right? They blocked pipelines. They've really held up leases for oil and gas drilling. All those things have contributed to the high gas prices, but I also think they should be careful about promising they're going to lower gas prices because gas prices are really not within the government's control, right? Sometimes international things affect the gas prices in ways that are far beyond anybody's ability. But generally, yeah, I think that's good stuff, especially as in contrast to the kind of Green New Deal or start rationing electricity kind of thing we're seeing in some parts of this country under Democrats.
Yeah, I will say that, market prices as it relates to petroleum, gas is outside of the purview of the federal government. But at the same time, the Biden administration, I keep wanting to say Obama because I'm still stuck on Glenn Greenwald and Snowden. But the Biden administration is responsible for the gas prices, the federal government, when they said no more Keystone Pipeline. That affects, the gas supply and all that. This administration has done so many things that has harmed the economy as far as gas prices and whatnot. And if the Republicans can go in the other direction, great. But, a lot of this stuff was an executive order, which is unconstitutional. And, if you could challenge all that, that would be helpful. But I don't see that on the horizon.
So the next one says, strengthen the supply chain and end dependence on China. Move supply chains away from China, expand U.S. manufacturing, and enhance America's economic competitiveness and cyber resiliency. So this one is kind of complicated. Let me say that I do think we need to decrease our reliance on China. They're not a reliable partner. We do get a lot of things from them. I think it's sometimes overstated the extent to which we're dependent on them. But for me, the way to do that would be to sign free trade deals with a bunch of other countries, India, Vietnam, South Korea, whoever it may be, that can produce the things that we currently get from China. I worry that at least for a good chunk of this Republican Party, when they say expand U.S. manufacturing, what they mean is crony subsidies and tariffs that would not only be net economic losers, but also go against everything they were just saying about reducing spending, cutting taxes, and reducing regulations. So I worry about this plank of it, not because I want us to be dependent on China, I don't, but because the approach that a lot of Republicans are taking to reducing our dependency on China these days is more protectionist in its orientation. So the next section is a future that's built on freedom. It makes sure every student can succeed and give parents a voice. Advance the Parents' Bill of Rights, recover learning lost from school closures, and expand parental choice so over 1 million more students can receive the education their parents know is best. And then the second part is defend fairness by ensuring that only women can compete in women's sports. First part, school choice, I think is great, based. I wonder why only over 1 million. I mean, shouldn't we be trying to get all students to have school choice? But also, I think a lot of that has to happen at the state level, school choice. I don't know how much you can really do federally on it. The second part, I kind of roll my eyes at. I do think sports should be sex segregated in most contexts. I do think transgender women competing in women's sports is often unfair. But, how is this a top problem in our society to be one of the 15 things listed or whatever on this platform? I really don't understand. And why is it a federal government policy? That doesn't make sense to me. That should be something that's decided by the schools or the organizations or at least local governments or something, not one size fits all federally. I don't know. That part to me, it made me roll my eyes a little. So next in the agenda, we've got some pretty boilerplate language about healthcare. Just want to make options more affordable and more transparency and choice and yada, yada, yada. Sure, Jan, healthcare's a mess. Republicans don't have a plan to fix it. And then this one says, confront big tech and demand fairness. Provide greater privacy and data security protections. Equip parents with more tools to keep their kids safe online and stop companies from putting politics ahead of people. Yeah, that last one, first off, all three of those could potentially be bad regulatorily. But that last one, what does this mean? Stop companies from putting politics ahead of people. First off, I have no idea what that means. Secondly, the government doesn't really have a right to stop these private platforms from making the decisions they want to make in terms of what speech they allow, who they allow, with an exception being when the government's pressuring them and colluding with them.
Putting politics ahead of people. Now, what could that mean? You're absolutely right as far as, private companies being able to do what they want, though there was that recent federal court decision about common carriers, and I thought that was interesting as far as big tech censoring and whatnot, but we'll leave that aside for a second. The conversation, the criticism of big tech is that they use their own partisan leanings to censor people who disagree with those leanings, conservatives, libertarians, what have you. And that's how I would read that to a degree, putting politics ahead of people. What that means governmentally, I don't know. But does that really have anything to do with a lot of this, a commitment to America? A lot of it's rhetoric just to help in the midterms. But that's how I read all that.
Yeah, and then the final plank is one about a nation that's safe, secure the border and combat illegal immigration, reduce crime and protect public safety, defend America's national security. And a lot of this section is pretty boilerplate. However, one piece of it jumps out to me. They essentially want to fund the hiring of 200,000 more police officers, which is interesting. And then they want to permanently criminalize all forms of illicit fentanyl. So fentanyl is terrible. It's killing tons of Americans. It's a pretty horrific crisis, but it's also one that emerged, to the extent of my understanding, from the drug war, right? Because fentanyl, it makes the drugs essentially stronger in smaller sizes and easier to smuggle. It's like it originated from this drug war. And then I also just don't think that the problem with our policing is that we need more officers. One, it can't be cheap. But secondly, I think we ask officers to do far too much, right? With all the nanny state, with all the police state stuff. And if what we should really do is get most of these laws that punish victimless behavior off the books, and then we have more than enough officers to actually just pursue violent crime, which is what they should be doing, and frankly, aren't great at when it comes to clearing the actual crimes.
No, I agree with you, and I think the promise of more police officers, you're absolutely right about everything with the drug war. I mean, all the problems with the drug war stem from having a drug war. It needs to end in full, and we're getting there in smaller pieces as time passes by. But I think, Brad, this still, as I mentioned earlier, is a reaction. It's a political move reacting to the defund the police. Democrats have run from that since. They've even said, oh, it was Trump that was responsible for this, which is stupid. I mean, they've said everything under the sun, but there is so much video of prominent Democrats saying defund the police, agreeing with that sentiment. And Republicans, in a political sense, would be fools not to just wrap that around their necks going into the midterms. And I think this is more of that.
All right, guys, that's the GOP's commitment to America for 2022. Let us know what you think in the comments. If you think this platform's good, what parts you like, what parts you don't. And we're going to talk about one last thing, and this is Kyrsten Sinema, everybody's favorite maverick Democrat from Arizona, triggering the internet yet again. So, Jack, I'm going to read you a few tweets from people very big mad online at Kyrsten Sinema. Kyrsten Sinema sold us all out. Kyrsten Sinema facilitates fascism. And this one actually made me laugh. Who knew Kyrsten Sinema was Mitch McConnell, with a face stitch of McConnell's face on her smoking hot body? And this last one said, parents, make sure to give your children all the attention they need so they don't grow up to be Kyrsten Sinema. People are really mad at her right now, and I'm struggling to see exactly why. Here is what she said, Jack, that triggered this big firestorm. Take a listen.
First, you touched on this in your talk, but can you expound on why you hold such support for the filibuster, especially when many others in your party have opposing views?
That's such a great question, Madeline. You know, Senator McConnell mentioned this in his opening remarks, and I mentioned it in my remarks as well. The danger of eliminating the 60-vote threshold is that the Senate becomes the House. And I remind everyone, I left the House and ran for the Senate for a reason. I remember my early years, I served for 6 years in the House of Representatives. And I remember being so frustrated during those 6 years because it felt like every time there was a big bipartisan solution that needed to happen, the Senate just kind of came up with a solution and then gave it to the House and we just ate it. And that's why I ran for the Senate. Yeah. I thought, wait a second, they're doing the work. So when Republicans are in control, they pass a little bit of crazy legislation. And when the Democrats are in control, they pass a little bit of crazy legislation. And the job of the Senate is to cool that passion. You know, there's a saying that the House is the cup of hot tea, and the Senate is the saucer in which you cool that tea. The Senate was designed to be a place that moves slowly, to cool down those passions, to think more strategically and long-term about the legislation before us. But the best thing you can do for your child is to not give them everything they want, right? And that's important to the United States Senate as well. We shouldn't get everything we want in the moment. So not only am I committed to the 60-vote threshold, I have an incredibly unpopular view. I actually think we should restore the 60-vote threshold for the areas in which it has been eliminated already. We should restore it. Yeah, not everyone likes that.
She is such a based queen. So just to make it super clear, what she's saying is not only is the 60 vote threshold, which requires more than a bare majority to pass something in the Senate, good, and she wants to keep it, unlike most members of her party, she wants to bring it back for the budget bills and the judicial nominations and other things where it has been scrapped. And I just say, one, kudos to you for taking a very unpopular position, but also, you're just spot on. You're correct. This is the point. These online screechers, these Twitter accounts go, anti-democracy, blah, blah, blah. That's the point. The point of the Senate is to be a check on the raw passions of the moment, that is the House of the Representatives, right? And the very idea is that when we actually we don't want to overhaul our entire society every 2 years when the House flips, and that when we actually want systemic change or something super big and impactful like the Civil Rights Act, it should pass when a majority of the Senate, which would mean necessarily a majority of the country, because it's even harder to get a majority of the Senate than to get a bare majority. We actually want everybody on board with that, and we want it to have rationed debate and have been fully thought through. They just want to ram everything through as quickly as they can every time they win one election, and someone like Kyrsten Sinema gets truly insane levels of vitriol and hate online simply for standing up and saying, slow down.
Can Sinema run for president in 2024? That might be a better choice than everybody's talking about. Look, Senator Mike Lee recently got in trouble for saying we're not a democracy. And what he meant by that, people had a lot of fun with that. Like, oh, he was an authoritarian, he's a fascist. No, what he means by that, and when Rand Paul would say it, or his father, or anybody else, is that we're a Republican democracy. We're not a pure democracy. And things like parliamentary procedure as designed and envisioned by the Founding Fathers is part of that, and that is exactly what Sinema just described. The Senate there, the 60 vote, the filibuster, the whole thing is there to cool the passions of the majority. And like you said, Brad, do we have our lives and understanding of what we can do and what we cannot do radically upended every 2 years? No, that's not how our system is designed. We are a democracy. We are a Republican democracy. And the Senate and the filibuster is part of that. The critics of Sinema want it to be that. We want all this crazy stuff. The Democrats are in power. We're worried the Republicans might win. Let's push it through, push it through. How dare you, Sinema, want to take your oath to the Constitution seriously? How dare you? That's basically what they're saying, even though they're too stupid and dim-witted to know it. And let's look at this, too. I remember when Trump was in power and, Republicans in Congress, a lot of Republicans, when Trump was president, wanted to get rid of the filibuster then. If you remember that, that was a thing. And I was like, you're an idiot. I worked for a Republican senator who was famous for his filibuster over drones and stopping John Brennan from being, all this stuff. The filibuster is important, the 60 vote. I agree with everything Sinema said there, and thank God there's people in Congress who still remember what the Constitution is supposed to be and how our system's supposed to work.
Yeah, and it's just funny to me because people were sharing this polling that shows she is wildly unpopular among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And I'm like, that is how you know you're doing something right. But on the other point, too, I just think it's so incredibly short-sighted when one side wants to scrap the filibuster, because they might be able to pass some big Democratic priorities if they were to scrap it. But then just after November even, or maybe 2 years after that, Republicans will flip and take the House. In 2024, they may well take the presidency. And then all of a sudden, you're going to have a nationwide abortion ban passed. If all you need is 50 votes, that would never pass anytime soon if you have a 60 vote threshold in the Senate. Now, I'm not saying one way or the other, although I think abortion should be a state issue. But what I'm saying is that Democrats want to get rid of it. It's like, you gotta think more than 2 seconds ahead. This will come back to bite you. We will get mandated open carry nationwide from the federal government if they only need 50 votes. We'll get a national abortion ban. We'll get all sorts of things progressives will hate if they actually got their way on this. So it's crazy to me how much hate someone like Kyrsten Sinema gets, because she's actually doing Democrats and the progressive movement a tremendous service by preventing them from shooting themselves in the foot.
And they're too goofy to realize it. They have no idea. she's the smartest person in the room, and her critics who think they've got it together, they want to do radical stuff quickly and forget about the fact that Republicans can do the same thing, like you just said, a nationwide abortion ban. And there's the mindset in the Republican Party right now that they had that power and that, if things change and it was 50 votes in the Senate, they would do it.
I also just have to say, while we're at it, she is one of the most best-dressed and stylish members of Congress, and I love her iconic, I don't give a bleep energy that she has. I just think it's great. But now, Jack, let's go to the mailbag. We have some good comments to run through. So, from last week's episode, Rolling Tree said, fairly good nuanced takes from both of you, but most importantly, thank you for actually researching if these immigrants were misled and for acknowledging the limited degree of clarity and ambiguity. Actual nuanced information like that is several times more important what a rational thinker needs from news journalism and media. Another commentator said, DeSantis is the boss. I will be sprinting to my polling station to vote for this man for president in 2024. Okay. Jack, you want to read a few of these? Because a couple of these are at me.
Sure. This Rochelle Wagner says, your facial expressions are so extra. That's a you. Here, I like this one. Josh Carlson, libertarianism is creepy. Translation, I'm afraid of responsibility. Well, that's one way to interpret that for sure. Cereal Bowl wants to see a Polumbo Cox 2028 ticket. I'd be fully in favor of that.
This one cracked me up because we reacted to a comment that said Polumbo Cox 2024, and I explained I would not be constitutionally eligible for the age requirement. What's funny about this is I still will not be constitutionally eligible. All right, well, to wrap up the show, Jack, do you have a hot take for us?
I guess I do. I started watching the Dahmer episodic series on Netflix about Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer cannibal. It's very well done. I enjoyed what I watched, but the middle of the third episode, I kind of quit and I'm not going back. Not because it's not well done. I can't take it. Like, it's too gross and to think about. And I like some dark drama, but it was just too much for me. Other people watched it all the way through. What I saw was very quality. I recommend it if you can make it through that, but I just couldn't do it.
That's totally fair. I am watching the new Game of Thrones series, and my hot take is that the hot takes are all mostly wrong. I've seen woke hot takes about how Game of Thrones is homophobic because it kills off the gay character, and I'm like, well, actually, I think it's just representing medieval, like what it would be like. It's like you're talking about a medieval society. So, and then I've seen like angry conservative takes over the fact that there's a black character, and they're saying it's like forced diversity in one of these families, that it wouldn't make sense. And I'm like, it's not that deep, bro. Like, it's just a black character. I don't care. I really don't. Doesn't faze me in the slightest. And I can't imagine getting upset about it on the internet. So it's okay. The series is okay. It's definitely not living up to the OG Game of Thrones hype, but there's something about it that's the same. So that's good. But yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes as well from here. So no spoilers, folks, but that my hot take is that the hot takes are all unnecessary. And with that, guys, that is it for this week's Base Politics podcast. If you enjoyed this show, be sure to rate and review us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And we'll talk to you all again next week. In the meantime, stay base.